Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our 2022 season of The Table. We are live, and I hope you enjoyed that intro. I can't take credit for making it, but I'm very excited that we are raising the bar on our tech sophistication. Hopefully it'll all work today, because heaven knows I'm often challenged from a technology perspective. I am so excited about today. So many great things are happening, and we have an amazing guest. And so to start, I would first like to share with everyone that I have partnered with Daily Pay, and they are sponsoring our show today. So thank you so much. And we will hear more from them later in our conversation. But I definitely want to shout out thank you for the great partnership. And if you guys are not familiar with the product that Daily Pay offers, I would love to chat with you about it. They provide on-demand pay solutions for employees, and it's a phenomenal product. And I can't say enough great things about it. It's a product I have personally used and implemented when I was a CHRO at an organization. By far one of the very best benefits I've ever offered. And I would love to share more with you about that. So thank you, everyone, and all my friends over at Daily Pay for sponsoring today's show. And with that, I would love to introduce our guest today. So if you're watching, you already know. Today we have the amazing Lindsey Pollak as a guest. Lindsey is a New York Times bestseller, her most recent book, Recalculating. Another one of her books, Becoming the Boss. Another one of her books, The Remix. Today we'll likely be focusing on Recalculating, which is phenomenal. If you have not read it or listened to it yet, I highly encourage you to do so. Lindsey is a Yale University graduate, which is prestigious in its own right, but everything she's done since then is just so incredibly impressive. She is a voice for the workplace. She is a go-to person in the media and around the world from a workplace perspective, and how to build your career and create the career you really want and deserve. She is an author, published author with HarperCollins, and Lindsey was shortlisted for the 2021 Thinkers 50 Talent Award and named to the 2020 Thinkers 50 Radar list, which is an amazing honor. It's a global honor of management thinkers whose work is shaping the future of how organizations are managed and led. I could go on for quite some time, but with that, I will bring Lindsey into the program. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you.
Barbie, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. And I also already see my friend Chris Whitney in the chat. So I'm delighted to welcome all of your viewers as well.
Yes. So anyone who is watching live, we absolutely invite and encourage your comments and your participation and engagement. It really helps shape the conversation and lets us know who's out there and what's top of mind for you. And both Lindsey and I are very comfortable answering questions on the fly. So please jump in. Hello, Christina from, let's see, are you from South Carolina? No. Where are you from? Let us know where you're from. That's also really fun. Lindsey sits in New York City. I'm here in Tampa. So we're going to jump right into Recalculating. I listened to this book. So I'm the person who always buys the hard copy and then the audiobook, because I'm an Audible learner. And I didn't realize this until about a year or two ago, when my wife said to me, "You've got all these books, but I never see you reading them. How do you consume the content?" I'm like, well, I listen to the audiobooks, because my doctor had diagnosed me with ADHD a few years ago and said, you'll likely absorb information better audibly, which now makes total sense as a trained musician. It just all kind of came together. But then I go through the book and make notes and reference and look at all the materials and all that great stuff. So I love your audiobook. I think you did a beautiful job with it. So thank you for doing that. Not everybody does the audiobook version, so highly encourage that. So hello, Hashish. Thank you for joining us as well. Lindsey, what prompted you to write this particular book? I'd love to hear kind of your story of what got you here. And we know you've already written some other amazing books, but this one seemed like it was so timely, so poignant with everything that we thought we might be done with, but we're still in the throes of it. So kind of give us a little backstory on what inspired this book for you.
Yeah, and thank you for buying 2 versions of the book. You're the kind of person authors love, that you buy in multiple formats, for sure.
Yes.
So, you know how people say they have like an accidental 3rd child or an accidental 4th child? I've been calling this my accidental 4th book because the truth is I didn't intend to write this book. My previous book, The Remix, which you so graciously showed, came out in 2019. And I was out on the road promoting that book. I was doing keynotes and workshops. That was about the multi-generational workplace. Yes. And then COVID hit. And truly, I know many of us have been through a lot of change and trauma. In a period of about 2 weeks in March of 2020, I went from a fully booked calendar of events. You can see I keep my calendar on my wall, and it's usually, covered in notes. And I kept erasing one event after the other. They all got canceled. And I went from a fully booked calendar to a completely empty calendar. And that is not an exaggeration. And I was scared. I was frightened. I'm a professional speaker. That's what I do. I write books and talk about them. Yeah. And I was looking out my window in New York City. You can hear sirens in the background already. And I saw cars on the street. And I truly just had this sort of little aha moment. And I felt like that moment when you're driving your car and your GPS is giving you directions and it kind of glitches for a minute when you hit traffic or you take a wrong turn, and it says recalculating, just like the image on the book cover. And I thought 2020 was as if we were all driving our cars, doing our thing, going where we wanted to go. And suddenly the pandemic said, nope, you can't go that way anymore. And funny enough, even though I was frightened and it was a tough time, I really kind of felt this sense of optimism, because I know when I'm driving and my GPS recalculates, it says there's another way, right? Yeah, you can't go the way you wanted, but you can still get to your destination. And your GPS never says, sorry, Barbie, you have to go back to your driveway and start all over again, right? It takes the progress you've made. Yeah. And it incorporates it. And that was really the flash of insight. And I will say the kind of books that I write are really based on what I want to know. So my first book was called Getting from College to Career because I wanted to learn how to do that, becoming the boss when I first became a manager. And so I started reaching out to experts like you, HR professionals, recruiters, job seekers, people who've been laid off, entrepreneurs, and sort of just posed the question, what are you doing right now? How are you getting through this? And it was partly, I thought, if it doesn't turn into a book, at least I'll get some good ideas. That became the seed of Recalculating, and the book came out in March of 2021, which we thought at the time the book would be post-pandemic, but it ended up being very much right in the middle of this pandemic.
Yes, so many of us have had that same experience, right? One of the folks watching right now, Natasha, hello, my friend. Thank you for being here. I was actually pre-show prepping with Lindsey and shared with her that you are in New York, and Natasha and I have had this very conversation, and she does a lot of what you and I both do. She's an author, she's a speaker, she's a consultant, and she's had to also completely reinvent her business. And now she's busier than ever. But your erasing the calendar thing, that was one of the things we talked about, was all the events that we had planned, all of the things, that the connection points, they all just disappeared, whether you were monetizing those connection points or it was just part of your everyday life. So many of those connection points just evaporated almost in the blink of an eye, right? We went from, oh, there's something happening in the eastern side of the world, right? There's something happening, and then it just was slowly creeping along, and then all of a sudden it was like, boom, the switch flipped and everything was different. So, and for me, May 14th, I will not forget that date ever, but I went into work. I was a CHRO at the time, and I reported to the CEO, and he said, hey, we need to have a conversation, go into a meeting. And I was informed that my position had been eliminated. The company was really struggling as a result of COVID, and they had to make really tough decisions. And while it was very difficult for me, I also, like you said, there was almost a sense of relief, a sense of calm because I knew I wasn't alone. Like everybody in some way was being impacted personally, professionally. And so I knew there was another path. I love how you said that. It might not have been the path I thought I was going to follow, but there was another one. And it's turned out to be an amazing one, which I think a lot of folks are now recognizing. Which leads me to this article. And I don't know if you've seen or anyone has seen this yet, but I got my copy of Entrepreneur today. And it says, people want more than a paycheck. They want purpose. And here's where to start. And I think that's an amazing article to be an Entrepreneur magazine, because I think the rest of the world is recognizing that the workplace of yesterday is no longer going to suffice for what employees expect and deserve today. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that when you think about everything that all the data and the folks you've spoken with and interviewed for this book, which is so full of great information. What are the, if you said, three things, what are the three things you think are the biggest changes that our workplaces and our people are going through and are going to need to adapt to?
Your story, Barbie, resonates so much. So many people I interviewed said, I was kind of itching for a change. Or when it happened, yes, I was disappointed. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was kind of the, kick in the pants that I needed. So I'm so not surprised to hear you say that, as traumatic as it can be to lose a job, that you thought, okay, I can do this. So I think that was a really common experience. And I think this ties really well with this current news cycle of the Great Resignation, right? We've had the highest number of people quitting their jobs. I think it's so much deeper than that. A lot of people tie it to salary. And yes, a lot of people are quitting their jobs, particularly in retail and, certain industries where hospitality, where you want to earn more money, and that's fine. But I think for a lot of people, it really is tied to these bigger concepts that if the job market is very strong right now, if there are opportunities because of COVID that have opened up, maybe it's a chance to think about more for ourselves. And I agree with you. I think number one, I would say out of three is purpose, which is, what do I really want my life to be? When you're sitting at home in lockdown, you have a lot of time to think about those sorts of things. So yes. I think a job that aligns to purpose, and we really see this a lot, particularly with the youngest generation, what we call Generation Z. When you have a world full of technology and opportunities and, so much out there, you start to think about, what do I really want? What's meaningful to me? So I'm seeing a lot more job seekers who say to a company, what's your position on the environment? What's your position on diversity, equity, inclusion? I want to work for a company that aligns. And I think a lot of that has to do with personal brand, that if you're putting yourself out there on LinkedIn, where we are right now, or any social media site, I want to align with the brand and the values of the company I work for. So I would say number one is definitely purpose. Number two, we have to talk about flexibility, of course, that people are realizing that they can work in different ways than they have ever worked before. And, I've been writing about this topic for years, about flexibility in the workplace. Yeah. And it was always kind of an all or nothing, right? It was sort of everybody in the office all the time, or a free for all. And I think what we're realizing, right, is that this word hybrid, which I think has become a little too broad, means that we don't all have to work one way or the other. There's a lot of middle ground in there, but I kind of think we're in the messy middle of this, where we don't know what work is going to look like. I don't think everyone's going to be in the office 5 days a week, but I also don't think everybody's going to make their own schedule and do whatever they want. We're going to find new models. And I think there's a lot of excitement, but also a lot of uncertainty. A lot of job seekers say, how do I know if a company is remote now, that they're going to continue to be remote in 6 months? And the answer is, we don't know. And so I think there's a lot of hesitation about flexibility, but a lot of rethinking for some people who will now only look for jobs that are remote. And I respect that a lot. If that's your top priority, there are certainly companies that are willing to commit to that. And the third thing I just wanted to bring up is mental health, which I think ties in very much to the benefits and wellness conversation. I think we're going to be unpacking the human burnout, mental health, loneliness, overwhelm piece of this for a very, very, very long time. And I think companies that understand that we have to think of the whole person and all of their needs, and that this is at different life stages, right? parents like us have a particular set of challenges. People who are single and live on their own have a set of challenges. People who are older have a set of challenges. People who have grown close to pets have a different set of challenges. People who have experienced long COVID have a different set of mental health challenges. So I think really making that a very prominent piece of the conversation moving forward is going to be really important. So my top three are purpose, flexibility, and mental health.
I love those. Those absolutely align with where I coach folks and when I'm working with organizations to help them understand, it's about individualization and how it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. We have to move away from that petrified place of litigation avoidance, right? That's where it comes from, is if we do it for one, we have to do it for all. And I think we realize now that we don't have to do that. One, not everybody wants the same things, as you mentioned. So some people love working from home. Some don't like it at all. I love it. My wife goes into her office every single day. She just is not a work at home person. She'll take calls every now and again, but from a productivity perspective, she just doesn't like it. Whereas I thrive in this space. So we have to understand that, one, not everybody wants the same things. Not everybody needs the same things. And I think if we are willing as the employer to meet people at least halfway, to say, okay, we know, Lindsey, you really love working from home, but we feel as an organization, it's important that we are at least in the same space together once a week, once a month. Or you have to be available to come in at certain times for certain meetings. Like, find whatever that individualized element is. And if you can do it, do it. We've got to just let go of the fear. And I think we were so litigation and fear driven for so long that it ruled everything. And we became the HR policy police, and everything was rigid and black and white. And I think COVID has taught us that nothing is black and white. Nothing that we thought was set in stone. And I also believe that employees are so much more empowered now. They realize that they are the ones who are driving a lot of this change. And I do hope that we treat that with the respect it deserves, and we don't just, throw complete caution to the wind and create utter chaos, that we are able to move forward in a very thoughtful, purposeful way, so that people feel as though they're appreciated and they're able to work in a situation that allows them to thrive. So I completely agree with your top three. And if I could say individualization any more than I have been lately, I feel like it's on constant repeat. But I think it's a huge part of what we have to do. And I know it's kind of hard for some of our HR practitioners, our HR pros, to do that, because we have been so trained. It's been so ingrained in us that it has to be what works for everyone. To let go of that is going to be a challenge, but I do believe we can do it. When you think about the moments or the times of recalculating, and then, okay, now I was on this path, but now I have these 4 other options, and one path might take me longer, one might have tolls, so I might have to invest something. When we look at kind of, and tying it back to that analogy, what are some of the ways that you're helping folks to understand how they can recalculate and maybe tap into things that they hadn't yet even touched on? Other skills, other career types, other industries, or what have you. I know you share some really great ideas about ways that people can look at everything they can bring to the table that perhaps they hadn't considered before, which also I think goes into the brand piece that you were talking about.
I can tell you're a good coach, because this reminds me of something. I have my own coach who I work with, and I tend to be a little bit of one of those black and white thinkers that you talked about, or certainly a perfectionist, where I think, well, if I don't know exactly which path I want to take, I'm not going to do anything. Or if there are 4 paths, I have to sit and think really hard and analyze and do pro and con lists and SWOT analysis, and then I'll figure it out. And then
don't forget the racy. You got to do the racy.
Yes, of course. Yes, and set my OKRs, and then everything will be fine. Yeah. And the reality is, I think in some ways, the pandemic has provided some cover to experiment and to mess up and not be perfect. And I think that because it was such chaos, you've heard the phrase, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. I think I somehow allowed myself to not be perfect at everything because nobody knew how to be perfect in a pandemic. And so I tried coaching. I don't really like coaching. It wasn't a good fit. But I tried to do virtual shorter events. That worked really well, right? I developed my first LinkedIn learning course. That worked really well. I think that the key to figuring out which path to pursue or which paths is you've got to take the first step. And I think it's very much kind of a growth mindset attitude where we think if I'm not going to be perfect at that, I'm not going to do it at all. But where can you dip a toe into entrepreneurship or watch a webinar or a TED talk about a topic that's interesting to you? You know, I think we have so many tools like LinkedIn Learning, like Coursera, Udemy, even Google, where you could say, you know, I've always kind of wondered what it would take to be a teacher. I'm going to Google how to get a teaching degree at age 65. That little step will tell you more than wondering in your head. So when you sort of get a sense that you might kind of sort of maybe want to try something, go and do a little bit of research on it. You don't have to jump off a cliff. Oh, I think I might want to start a business. Well, figure out what that might be, because I think that fear of going too far is really scary for people. And I respect that, but you can make that first step instead of talking about it. So, you know, I have a rule. If I think about something twice or someone mentioned something twice, I always commit to doing that first little step instead of sitting and being paralyzed. And if you mess up or it doesn't work out, who cares? I kind of believe for the rest of our lives, if anything fails from like 2020 to, I don't know, 2022 or 23, we can say, oh, it was COVID. You know, like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. It was COVID. So I feel like we can use that to our advantage.
Yes. You know, it reminds me of, there's a concept that Dr. Brene Brown talks about, and everyone who watches me and follows me knows I'm a huge fan of Dr. Brene Brown. I absolutely love everything that she continues to offer our world. And she talks about this thing called the SFD, right? And to expect the SFD, which shitty first draft, that's what it is. She calls it, that's the reality, right? And when you do something for the first time ever, expect it's not going to be perfect. Expect that you're going to, it's a learning opportunity. You're gaining some skills, you're understanding kind of nuances and the network. I think that's the biggest thing for me as launching into this entrepreneurial space was I didn't have my network of go-to people established. When you're an employee, you're used to doing what you do as an employee, and you have your team in place, and there's administrative support. There's all the different support systems. There's somebody in finance who does the accounting. There's somebody in sales who does that. You focus on the HR work. So you launch into this, and I'm like, I don't know how to do accounting. I am not a personal brand manager. I don't know how to optimize social media, all the things. So it was overwhelming because I didn't have any of that. And at first I was just either all over the place or avoiding. I was choosing one of those two things because I just wasn't in that comfort space of this is what works for me. So I love what you said. You tried coaching and you don't really like it. I think it's a wonderful thing to know yourself well enough and to acknowledge that you might be great at it. You probably were really great at it, but you didn't love it. And that's okay. And how many people fall into careers that they don't really love because they're good at something. So having that self-awareness and giving yourself the permission to say, I tried it, don't love it, I'm going to move on. I think that if there's no other advice that people take away from today, I think that's huge, whether it's about a job or a project or an initiative or anything. Being willing to try it and then step back and say, yeah, that's not for me is okay to do. I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to, if we try it, we have to go all the way with it. Otherwise, people are going to perceive that we're quitters. Well, that's not a bad thing in my book. Walking away from something you don't love is the right reason to quit. So I think that's wonderful. So when we think about all of those pieces, and then somebody's in the workplace now, maybe they've recalculated, they found something they really like, but it's not resonating with them in a certain way, or perhaps there's elements of it that I wasn't prepared for this. Have you worked with folks, or what? How do you help people then hit that recalculate button again and not feel the shame of the I'm the job hopper, or I'm this, or I'm that. Have you had those experiences with some of the folks you've worked with or interviewed for your book?
I'm so glad, Barbie, you brought up shame, because I think the fear that people are watching, where they're going to judge me because I quit this job or went to a less prestigious company or changed my career. I really appreciate that perspective. I ended up writing a chapter of Recalculating called Turn Any Job into a Great Job, which is about recalculating in your current role. Because I think there's a sense, and I can see it happening in the workplace right now. The Great Resignation is such a theme, right? It's everywhere. That I think there are going to be a lot of people who quit their jobs and probably shouldn't, because they think, oh, it's the right time, right? I should quit my job. And I think that they might make a mistake. And what we're already seeing is the articles about people who are boomeranging, which is quitting
Yes.
and then saying, hey, can I have my job back? Which I think is kind of proving that theory. So what I would say is, think long and hard about whether the grass is really going to be greener outside of a company. And one of the things I think about a lot, I started my career in the 90s, well before LinkedIn. I worked at a Working Woman magazine in my first job. I loved it. And I went to work, and I'd have a good day or a not so good day or a mediocre day, and I'd come home, but I liked it enough to go back the next day, and I was happy. And what I didn't have was a site like LinkedIn, which I love. But let's be honest, when you log into LinkedIn every day, if you wanted to, you could find someone with a better job, or someone doing something cooler, or someone taking a risk, or getting promoted, or meeting someone interesting. And you sort of have this fear of missing out all the time. And I think that can cause some damage. And so what I encourage people to do is really think about, is there more I can do in my current role to recalculate without having to leave? Now, if it's toxic or you're miserable, get out of there, and now's a good time. But I think there are a lot of rewards for the people who stay, to be able to go to their bosses and their leaders and say, look, I'm committed, I'm doubling down. It's a good time to ask for a raise. It's a good time to ask for a promotion. I also think people don't take advantage of internal learning opportunities, internal networking opportunities, internal mobility. Are you taking advantage of everything that your organization has to offer? Because it's so common. I can't tell you how many HR people, and I bet you have a lot of stories where they're doing an exit interview with someone, and they say, why did you leave the company? And they say, well, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do this, I'm going elsewhere for it. And they say, why didn't you tell us? You could have done that here. We would have loved to do that for you. So really explore all of the possibilities in your current job, assuming it's not terrible. And I think there's a lot of room for growth, particularly right now.
I would agree with that. And one of the things I am seeing, because I do coach folks, is that there's in the HR profession especially, it's pretty well known that there's not a lot of focus and attention paid to the development of skills for the HR professionals outside of policy and legal elements, right? There's not the appreciation for ongoing development of people skills, and you're just supposed to know it. Like somebody somewhere waved a magic wand and said, oh, you're in HR, you don't need any more development. So what I'm seeing is a lot of HR professionals are reaching out to people like me, people like you, and getting coaches. So they may not want to go to the seminars anymore. They may not want to go to the annual big conferences, but they're doing things that are just for them, that can either help them in the job they have today or help them prepare for the job they want in the future, whether it's at that company or elsewhere. So they're really, it's almost an investing in their personal as well as their professional development. And I do see that happening quite a bit, especially in the HR space and in the leadership space. And I see people who have never worked in the HR profession really wanting to break in to help, I think, upskill the profession as a whole from an operational perspective, which I think is phenomenal. I think we need to get more and more people who were not raised in HR to come into this space and help us move certain areas forward. So when you see people who feel stuck and they're not necessarily unhappy, it's not toxic, what are some of the best ways? I know you mentioned a few, but are there other elements that you would offer, or a process to kind of do their own inventory of where they are and then where they want to go?
Yeah, three things come to mind. One is to really take advantage of any learning or training opportunities that your organization provides to make sure, like raise your hand if there's something you want to get better at, right? Everybody would raise their hand. I would love to be a little better at Excel, or maybe I'd like to improve my public speaking skills. And we sort of say, well, someday. Why not do that now and look through the course catalog of your company or whatever they offer, or simply on the web? There's so much out there. And again, I mentioned growth mindset in the work of Dr. Carol Dweck. You can get a little better at anything, right? If you committed every day to maybe listening to a leadership podcast, you would get a little bit better. Maybe you want to learn about cryptocurrency or NFTs because you want to be conversant in that stuff. Listen to a podcast about it. So I think number one is kind of self-education and committing to getting a little bit better at something. Number two, I think, is this idea of a formal coach or even something like an accountability partner. I wanted to start meditating at the beginning of the pandemic, and I started and I stopped and I started and I stopped. And then a friend of mine said, I really want to meditate too. How about if every day after you do your 10-minute meditation on the Calm app, just text me and tell me you did it. We did 500 days in a row simply by texting each other and keeping each other accountable. None of us have a degree in coaching, but that sort of worked. And the third thing is maybe a little counterintuitive. And Barbie, I think truly you are one of the best practitioners, and it's how I met you. I think you embody someone who gives first. Rather than what can I learn today? What can I do? I met you on Clubhouse, and I was just blown away by how often you would either start a room on Clubhouse or jump in and offer advice or invite other people to be on the stage. For 6 years, I was an official trainer for LinkedIn. They sent me all around the country to teach LinkedIn. And I remember Reid Hoffman, who's one of the founders of LinkedIn, he said, he founded it, he invented it. And he said, I think people use LinkedIn wrong. He said, I think most people go into LinkedIn and say, what can I get from LinkedIn today? And he said, what I do is I go in and say, what can I give? And I think you embody that. And while we often think about how can I improve myself? What can I get? What can I get? I think you're someone, and I think why you've been successful transitioning from corporate to entrepreneurship, where you say, what can I give? In any situation, what can I give? And that is a form of learning. And I think what you give, you get back tenfold. So I think part of learning and development and recalculating in a role or making a change is about deciding what to give. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Very kind. And I truly do appreciate that. And I think it is just part of the DNA of who I am. Because I do feel like when you give, the universe responds in kind. And sometimes, however, it's not in the way you think it's going to.
Right. It's not a one-for-one kind of arrangement.
No, not at all. But what's interesting about that is, it makes me think about the whole personal branding element of what we do, right? Certainly as entrepreneurs, it's a big part of what we do. But I don't know if this was, again, the universe pointing me in this direction before the pandemic really hit and before my job was impacted. But I knew at a point in time I wanted to open my own firm. And so I had started getting more active on LinkedIn, putting videos out, creating some coaching materials to share with people, and started that personal branding, doing keynote addresses in different conferences and that type of thing. And I do love that. If I could be any other kind of a coach other than for vocalists, it would be for personal branding, because I get the connection to how it impacts everything you do. And we used to call it your reputation, right? Because everybody's like, what does this new word mean? It's your reputation. It's what people say about you when you're not there. Are you top of mind when a topic comes up and they're like, oh, you should reach out to Lindsey. She knows this really, really well, or these three things, that's her sweet spot. So for employees, I think a lot of employees don't think about personal branding because they think, well, I'm not an entrepreneur, or I'm not a celebrity, or I'm not a writer, or whatever it might be. And I think we all have to understand that our personal brand exists. Everyone has one. Do you want to craft the message? Do you want to be the one who's designing that brand, which can then help further your career, whether it's at the organization you're in or a new one? Or do you just want it to be what it is without any of your intentional influence? And it's one of the things I spend a lot of time coaching HR professionals about: branding yourself, branding your team, What is the purpose of your team? How do you service your business? And start evangelizing those messages, because that's also how you set boundaries and how you allow people to know who you are and what you're about. And I think you've done a great job at spelling a lot of that out in your book for people who have found themselves in a position of, now what do I do? And really getting some of those things in order. When you think about building a personal brand, if you were starting from scratch, right? If you didn't know anything about it, what would you guide someone to do first, especially with your knowledge of LinkedIn?
So I love your positioning that it's just your reputation. Everybody has one. You don't have to invent a personal brand. It exists, but I couldn't agree with you more. Do not leave it up to chance that people have the impression of you that you want. So I have a really simple exercise anyone can do. I've done this with high school kids up to CEOs. Think of 3 words that you think other people would use to describe you as a professional. Creative, smart, analytical, friendly, etc. 3 words you think other people would use to describe you right now, today, January 11th, 2022.
Yeah,
what is it? I'm like, what year is it? What day is it? So what are 3 words people use to describe you right now? Fast forward a year from now. What 3 words would you most want people to use to describe you? What do you want to be your reputation? Now, maybe there's some crossover, maybe not. Maybe you say, I think people think I'm creative and that's what I want to be. Or maybe I think people think I'm maybe a follower, but I want to be a leader. So where's the growth? And the third question is, what are you going to do about it? Because you're not going to get there by hoping and wishing. You're going to get there by taking actions every day that tell people that you're that kind of person. And some of it is literally using words on your LinkedIn profile that reflect who you are. And I'll tell you a funny story. I do a lot of corporate training, right? I give workshops, but I wanted to do more keynote speaking. And I went to this like fancy brand consultant and she said, I have to tell you, you probably shouldn't hire me. I said, why? She said, because there's only one thing I'm going to tell you to do. Do you know the word keynote doesn't appear at all on your website or your LinkedIn profile? I had hoped people would see me as a keynote, but I had never actually used that word. Mm-hmm. So how can you use the terminology? How can you act as if you have certain things? Now, you can't call yourself an accountant if you're not an accountant. But I think a lot of times we hold back from saying the things that we want to be. And look at people, another trick is to look at 5 or 10 people whose brands or reputations you admire and say, what does Barbie do that I could do? What does this person do who's in the position that I want? All these tools are out there. So to me, LinkedIn is not just a tool to promote your personal brand. It's a tool to research the personal brands of people you admire and use that as examples of what you might want to be as well.
I love that. And to also understand, don't put the pressure on yourself that if you put it in your profile, it means you have to be a perfectionist at that. You don't have to be Brene Brown to be someone who talks about vulnerability or coaching others around, leadership in the workplace. You don't have to be that to contribute and to offer those services. Conversely, one of my dear friends who I coach as well is in career transition. And she's in the HR space. And I was helping her with her resume, which I don't like to do. So please, I am not a resume coach. Don't ask me. I'm saying that out loud because I've had people send me their resumes for help. And I'm like, no. But for a friend, I was doing it. And I asked her, what are the things you really enjoy doing in the space? And she's like, well, she loves doing payroll. She loves employee relations and culture work. Great. What don't you like doing? She's like, oh, I hate recruiting. I hate it. It's just not my thing. Okay, let's look at your resume. What's the first bullet point on your resume under your skill set? Recruiting. I said, so do you see how this could be problematic for someone who doesn't want to do that in the future? So I think we have to be aware of what we're sending out into the world. The messages, the words, the language is so important, because if that's the first word on your resume and the first word on your profile, but it's not what you want to do, you might want to drop it down to the bottom or remove it in its entirety, because we don't realize the impact that it can have, whether it's an SEO element or something that someone's just reading. Those each and every one of those words has a huge impact.
It reminds me, I'm just thinking of your position. A lot of people lead with what they no longer want to do. I'm recovering from a career in HR, blah, 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 blah. And by the way, I have my own coaching business. It's like, no, I have my own coaching business. Oh, and by the way, I left a career in HR, right? Lead with what you want, not with what you don't. I love that.
Oh, I love that. That's a quote we need to take away from here. Lead with what you want, not with what you don't. I love that. I'm going to make a poster now, but I'll credit you with it. So
T-shirt, I got it.
Yes, I love that. So now I want to talk a little bit about the way our workplaces are changing. One of the things, like in that entrepreneur article, employees are looking for purpose. And I think they're also looking for employers to step up in ways to meet them where they are, whether it's mental health benefits, whether it's expanded benefits for folks in the trans space, right? Transgender folks. You know, there are organizations. When I worked at Amazon, they were one of the only, if not the only, company that offered full benefits for folks in transition. There are these unique things that can come up that you can offer your employees. That is everybody there going to use it? No. But it speaks to what you believe in and what you support as an organization. Are you seeing any of those changes happening from an org perspective where organizations are saying, we've got to change the way we're approaching this in order to meet our people where they are?
I love this topic, and I want to give a different example. And I think the trans example is really good because it's a relatively small percentage of the population that has a huge impact. It reminds me, there's a name for this, and I can't think of it now, but they often talk about it with people with disabilities, that when you cut a sidewalk to help people with wheelchairs, it also helps moms with strollers. It also helps elderly people with, carts, et cetera. It also helps, anybody who is a little slow that day. So when you solve for one group that maybe seems to be small in number, you open up opportunities. And I think it goes back to that very first thing you said about individuality. And one size does not fit all. And the example I give, because I do a lot on generational differences, is I would say most HR people would agree that a 401k match is kind of a gold standard benefit, right? We match your 401k contribution, and that's wonderful. But there was a consulting firm that found that their younger employees, their millennials and Gen Zs, were not taking the match. And they were saying, in my mind, there was probably a board meeting where they said, well, these are lazy, entitled narcissists. This younger generation doesn't understand financial well-being. But instead, somebody was smart enough to say, hey, we should ask them, curb cuts. Thank you, Alexander. We should ask them why they're not taking the 401k match. And lo and behold, when you actually ask, what the young employee said was, I would love to take your employee match on my 401k. I can't save for retirement. I'm still paying my student loans.
Right.
And so this company came out and said, you know what? The goal is your financial well-being. The goal is for you to have peace of mind about your finances. So we're now going to offer you a choice. You can either take a match for your retirement contribution, or we will match your student loan repayment. And guess what? It wasn't just the young people who took that opportunity. It was parents and grandparents of people with student loan debt who wanted to support them. So when you actually stop and say the goal is not a 401k match, the goal is financial well-being, how can we offer that to different people? The goal is comfort on the sidewalk. The goal is not to serve a person with a wheelchair. So I think when you take that holistic approach and you take that individual approach that you mentioned, you really come to some very unique outcomes. Now, you can't have a benefit that's going to serve everybody every minute all the time, but you can certainly expand the pie exponentially by simply asking the question, what is our bigger mission here, and how can we find multiple ways to solve it?
I absolutely love that. And it's a lot of the work I do with organizations. HR teams will talk about picture. Let's move away from the tactical immediate elements, right? Like the curb cuts, because that's such a great example. But what is it solving for? It's creating more comfort for the people who are utilizing this sidewalk or this space. And that's really what it's all about, is the bigger picture and the bigger problems we're solving. And I couldn't have asked for a better segue into sharing some information. So as I mentioned to everybody watching, Daily Pay has joined the table and the business of HR as a sponsor. And I am going to share with you all some phenomenal information that they have to share when we talk about financial wellness, when we talk about meeting people where they are. On-demand pay is really changing the game when it comes to equity and accessibility of money. One of the things that I found just mind-boggling, I was on a call a few weeks ago with a gentleman who works in Egypt. 75% of Egyptians were unbanked or are unbanked. They don't have access to digital money in the way that those who have a relationship with a bank have. And so on-demand pay can help solve some of those issues and raise the bar of equity. So I want to share this with the audience really quickly, if you don't mind, so that everybody can hear this message about why this is such a great benefit and can help you and your organization.
The reason your employees work isn't just about enjoying the work they do. It's about keeping their families going, fresh starts, happiness, and feeling strong. It's time to show your workers you get it. Empower your workforce with on-demand pay. It isn't just about accessing their earned pay before payday. It's about giving employees access to their money as they earn it. Daily Pay, celebrating workers every day.
I love that. Because they're not there. Yes, the message is it's accessing your money, but it's not about money. It's about your life and what you can do with that money. So it is a product that, yes, it integrates with your payroll from a tactical perspective. It's something that allows you to do X, Y, and Z. But the bigger picture is what we're seeing from the data is of users, they're getting a 72% increase in retention among users of on-demand pay. We're seeing higher engagement. People are checking how many hours they've worked so they can see their balances going up hour by hour by hour. So when we think about employees being engaged and picking up that extra shift or wanting to work that overtime, this is a way to re-engage them with that. So I think it's just so brilliant, especially where we are in the world today. And it's just one of many different types of benefits that do that. But we are going to see, I think, a big focus on financial wellness from the example you shared. I love that, paying off student loans or paying tuition upfront versus reimbursement, because I think we've really confused that one too. Reimbursement's great, but if you don't have the $5,000, then reimbursement isn't going to help you. So there's so many elements to this. And I love sharing the message of Daily Pay because as a user, it's been phenomenal. So thank you everyone for allowing me to share that message with you. All right, so we are rounding towards 1 o'clock here. So I want to make sure if folks have questions for you that they have taken the opportunity to share those. So if anyone has questions you'd like to ask Lindsey, please bring them into the chat now so that we can see them and respond to you here verbally. And then I'm going to ask you some fun questions while we see if folks out there in the audience have any maybe more serious questions. So if you had to be on a deserted island for a period of time and you could take one thing with you, living or not, what would it be?
So I have to be honest, the audience, that Barbie previewed this question and we both said we probably should say our spouse or a child, or they can't pick between children. I'm going to go, besides those answers, with an empty Kindle that I could download any books. I am a huge reader and I love to read. So I would bring an empty Kindle and hopefully a library card or an Amazon subscription so I could download all the books I wanted.
I love that. See, that's a great answer. Mine was my dog. I was on a webinar not long ago and they asked me that question and I'm like, I know I'm supposed to say my spouse and children, but the honest response that popped into my head first was my dog.
I feel like after 2 years in quarantine and lockdown, nobody's really going to say their spouse and children. So yeah, we can move on from that answer. Let's be honest. Love them to death, but I'd bring my Kindle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we have a question here from Christina. Can we talk more about having those conversations with supervisors about growth with your current employer? You want to field that one?
Yeah, I'll start and then you take it from the HR perspective. I think that what a lot of people do is they say to a boss or a supervisor or a mentor, I want to grow, what should I do? right? And we sort of put the burden on the other person. I think we have to flip it and do the work ourselves, which is become a leading expert on what you want. Well, I've done some research and I think there are 3 courses I could take, or I've identified 3 roles that might be a good next step for me, or I've researched 3 classes. I'd like to do this. So I think if you're able to do the work yourself and say, I'd like to grow and I will do all of the work myself. You just have to give me a budget or say yes or so on. I think that's really, really powerful. So not, I'd like more growth opportunity, but I've researched 5 conferences that I'd like to attend. Is there one that you would approve? I think that is going to get you a yes more than anything else. But Barbie, you've been on the other side of those conversations. What would you say?
So not much different, frankly. I would say one of the biggest gaps I see is exactly what you just shared. We have to take ownership for where we go and how we grow. And if you are an individual contributor and perhaps you want to move into a leadership role, but you really don't have that experience, ask for a stretch assignment or partner with a leader, maybe not your direct leader, maybe a leader from another area who you really admire and you like the way they do something and you don't really understand how they're able to manage those conversations, those challenges. Ask for the opportunity. Could I take, 2 hours a week and shadow so-and-so or spend time with this person? Or could I lead our next team meeting? Could I take the responsibility of creating the agenda, the topics, gathering feedback from the team and lead that discussion? So start to position yourself as a leader, whether or not you have direct reports. So those are some of the things that I see people missing out on quite a bit, is that they feel as though we're going to reach out and with this magic wand and say, boom, today you're going to be promoted to lead the team. We know you don't have any experience, but go for it. Typically that doesn't happen. I know sometimes it does. So, don't shoot me for that one. But for the most part, we want people who have exhibited some level of knowledge or experience in those areas. So that's one of the things I think that people can do. And it doesn't cost any money. It's just broaching the conversation about where you want to go. And also realizing that sometimes there are lateral moves that will grow your career more than you can ever imagine. So it's not always money driven. It's experience driven. It's exposure driven. And I would also say, make sure you have the right advocates, whether they're within your organization or outside, whether it's a mentor or a coach, but have people who are willing to say your name when opportunities come up and say, oh, I was just talking with Sam the other day and she was really interested in learning more about project management. Would you be open to me introducing you so that maybe she can help you with this project? So there's so much work to be done within an organization. It's not very often that people will be told no if they want to put themselves out there to do more, to learn more, or to expand themselves. So that would be one thing I would say to definitely look into. So great question, Christina. Thank you for that. Okay. Well, we are rolling in. If there's no other questions, I am a stickler for trying to keep us on time or early, because I know we are on lunch hours for people who are in the Eastern time zone, and it's 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. for folks out west. And I cannot thank you enough, Lindsey, for joining us today. You have so much knowledge, so much expertise to share. Again, if you guys haven't picked up this book, whether you pick up the paperback, hardback, or audio, I encourage you to do it. Share it with your teams. It will really help in so many different ways. If that's not the one for you, Becoming the Boss is also a great read, again, for somebody who wants to transition into leadership, or you've recently transitioned into leadership and you're like, what the hell's happening? This might be able to give you the roadmap and some help there. And then Remix, I again love this one because we are in a situation today where there are more generations in the workforce than there has ever been. And the challenges are different. And, we touched on some of that today about benefit offerings that are more meaningful than others. But there's a lot of other differentiators that sometimes we label as negative. But if we just get underneath them a little bit, they're really not. And they're what makes us human. And it also gives us the edge to be innovative and to really grow together. So I can't encourage you guys enough to go out there, buy these books, Connect with Lindsey. If you're not already following her on LinkedIn, absolutely go to her profile, hit that follow button. And I am so grateful for you today. And I will also, just as a plug for next week, I am thrilled to have Ashley Brundage on the show. She is an amazing advocate for the LGBTQ plus community. She herself has gone through transition, and she shares her experiences so freely with everyone. And she has a book, Empowering Differences, which is phenomenal. I encourage all of you to check that out and join us next week, Tuesday at noon Eastern time, where we're going to have a wonderful conversation and learn from Ashley. So thank you all so much for being here. We have a few comments here I want to make sure we show so that everybody gets it. And if you have any questions also, please feel free to reach out to Lindsey or me on LinkedIn. We're both pretty active there. Always happy to interact with you guys as much as we possibly can. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Lindsey, thank you. I've learned so much from you today that I will be using in coaching others as well as on the table here each week. And as I consult with folks, I'm very excited, and I hope you'll come back anytime. You have an open invitation to join us anytime.
I would love you. Thank you so much for having me, Barbie, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.